Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to introduce Dr. Patricia Wright, today's speaker. Patricia Wright is a primatologist and conservationist who looks at ecosystems in entirety, not isolation. She's best known for her long-term work on lemurs in Madagascar, which spans over 27 years now. Pat did a bachelor's in biology and then worked in a lab in Harvard University. She then quit this job to prioritize her family, but the unusual behavior of her pet, owl monkey, spurred her to go to South America, taking her family with her. She did her PhD at the City University of New York on the behavior and ecology of night monkeys in Peru at John Terborg's site. Following this, she worked for Duke University Primate Center and then at the Department of Biological Anthropology at Duke. For her postdoc, she started working on tarsiers in Asia and then went to Madagascar to find a lemur that was thought to be extinct. While doing this, she found a new species and then found the species that was thought to be extinct. Shortly after this, selective logging of her study site made her turn her focus to conservation. Since then, she's been working to save the wildlife of Madagascar, asking basic research questions first, which now have led up to more intensive research. Her recent work involves infectious disease and wildlife. Pat describes herself as someone with many lives, or phases to her career. Her first life, as she says, was in South America, where she was inspired to do science and where she figured that she wanted to be a primatologist. During her middle life, when she traveled to various parts of the world, like Borneo, Philippines, Paraguay, and Peru, she figured she wanted to understand tropical ecosystems. But then Madagascar happened, where she could put to use everything she had learned as a biologist, and here she dedicated her life to research-based conservation. In her own words, her basic philosophy of life is that conservation must be done long-term. Conservation is about trust and social relations and getting people on board. Pat was one of the first people to work with human communities, starting in 1986, long before it was accepted in ecology, and her work involves today engaging with management, policymakers, and the government to bring about real change. Pat has an autobiography coming out on October 15th. It sounds very promising. It's called High Moon Over the Amazon, My Quest to Understand the Monkeys of the Night. And now you have Pat to talk to us about conservation of lemurs from Madagascar.
Hello, everybody. It's been really an incredible treat to be here in India. This is my second day in India in my life. And you've been very inspiring to me. The talks have been extraordinary. The organization is wonderful. And I thank you very much for inviting me. Now tonight I'm going to talk about a place not many of you have been, even though at one time Madagascar and India were joined. I'm going to talk first about the history of Madagascar and why it's so special to biologists. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about conservation in Madagascar, how I started doing research there and some of the projects that I have completed there and some of the ones that are ongoing and we are about to launch. This story starts a long, long time ago because it was 150 million years ago when there was a chunk of land that started to come off there was a chunk of land that came off of Africa and landed in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And about 88 million years ago, there were incredible volcanoes that went off. And two pieces were on different tectonic plates. And so the east side of this big mass started to go very quickly, the geologists tell me, up north. And of course, this big hunk that used to be attached to Madagascar is now India. So our paths were connected. Now, what happened? What was Madagascar like 88 million years ago? Well, we know that because we have some fossils about the fact that there were extraordinary dinosaurs there. This is Majungasaurus, one of the largest meat-eating dinosaurs ever to walk this earth. And they found out by finding the remains, the stomach remains, that they actually ate other dinosaurs and even, they say, the paleontologists, even ate offspring of others. So these fossils in Madagascar are complete And so we have the world's largest frog that's ever existed. We have a lot of feathered dinosaurs on Madagascar. And these fossils, every one of them is perfect. They get every bone. It's amazing deposits. So that was 88 million years ago. We know a lot about that period of time. But what we don't know, really, is what happened after that. After India left us, there are no fossils between this time and 20,000 years ago, or 10,000 really. So there's a big question mark in how lemurs got to Madagascar. Now we know a little bit about the plants. We know that there are about 12,000 species of flowering plants, and about 4,500 of them are trees. And this is rich for tropical areas. So they pretty much got the same kind of numbers of plants that you would expect from a tropical area. But then this island that was devoid, it seems, from what we can tell, of animals, suddenly animals started to arrive. Now, it's very isolated out there in the Indian Ocean, but we think that lemurs arrived perhaps on rafts, and this might have been one of the first lemurs looking out and seeing that big hunk of land called Madagascar. And Madagascar was very different and must have been a delightful place to land where there was absolutely no competition for just about anything, without any other animals as far as we know. So there were no birds or no bats, and mostly birds and bats are doing pollination and seed dispersal in other tropical rainforests. In Madagascar, it was the lemurs who had to do the job, where the jobs were left empty and they filled them. So I stay in Madagascar partially because I'm interested in ecosystem dynamics, and this is the only place in the world where primates are really driving the whole system. Now, about 65 million years ago, iguanas, boas, and turtles also arrived. Now, boas and iguanas both come from South America. So what were they doing there that early? Frogs arrived about 55 million years ago. And when frogs arrived, they began to diversify, and so now we have almost 400 species. They were very lucky because there weren't very many fish there, and the number one predators on frog eggs and even tadpoles are, of course, fish. So they too had this kind of very lucky beginning on Madagascar. The next to arrive on this isolated island were rodents. There's marine rodents mostly, birds, mostly insectivorous birds. There's now 257 species, and most of them are insectivorous. Colubrid snakes and some carnivores, mongooses and civets only, and tenrecs, which are small insectivorous mammals, found nowhere else but Madagascar. In fact, almost everything is found nowhere else on Madagascar. Almost all the species on Madagascar are endemic. And then bats were the last to arrive, surprisingly enough, because they fly, but they arrived about 12 million years ago. And this is what we tell from the molecular evidence, because, as I said, there's not a lot of fossils. There are 7 raptors, species of raptors that are on Madagascar now. There are 2 that have gone extinct, and they were giant raptors. These raptors, 3 of them, eat lemurs, and we know that by looking at the nests and watching what they bring to the nests. There are 7 species of carnivores, and all of them belong to the civet family or the mongoose group. And these are the ring-tailed mongoose and the Fusana civet. And the ring-tailed mongoose does eat lemurs, we know that for sure, the small lemurs, but the other one not. And then we also have predators. The top predator in Madagascar is something called Cryptoprocta ferox, the Fusa. and its main prey is the lemurs, and they are very good at climbing trees. They're long and lean. They look like what we would say in the United States, the mountain lions, but they're not, of course, related to cats at all. And that picture of the jaw that's being eaten by the fossa, I study the largest species of lemur, and they especially like to eat the largest species of lemur. I've studied it for 27 years, and we've had quite a few fatalities. Important when you're studying Madagascar to realize that there were a lot of animals that never arrived. So there are no felids, there are no cats, no lions or tigers, no canids, no dholes, no salamanders, newts, or toads for some odd reason, no ungulates. Can you imagine an ecosystem without any ungulates? No squirrels and no woodpeckers. That's important for later. And no poisonous snakes. After all those years of working in the Amazon, I was really happy about the no poisonous snakes. I could walk in the night and not worry about anything. Now, to really begin a story about the conservation of Madagascar, we have to realize that it is one of the biodiversity hotspots, like like India, which has Sri Lanka and the Western Ghats. Madagascar is considered a biodiversity hotspot. And I want you to look at this map for a minute, because it tells us something more than just how isolated Madagascar is. But on this map is the place where the people of Madagascar originated. There's a very brave people, because about 2,000 years ago, they took off in boats, and they went across this big expanse, and they arrived in Madagascar. And they arrived with rice, and they arrived with machetes of some sort called koop, and they arrived with fire. And of course, fire has really made a big change in Madagascar. Now, this is one of the last places on Earth where people actually arrived. So that is very important to what's been happening conservation-wise in Madagascar. India has a very deep cultural tradition, but Madagascar's is really quite shallow. One language throughout the whole of Madagascar, really one people. This is Madagascar, 1,000 miles long, 350 miles wide, and the white part on this map is all the area that is devastated. And when I say devastated, I mean people don't live there, animals don't live there. It's been burned for at least 1,000 years, and there's just no indication at all that any animals could live there now. That's a big chunk of land. However, what is remaining is just extraordinary, and that's what keeps me going. The place, this is Varma I'm going to talk about. The areas that are outlined in blue are protected areas. And when I went in the beginning, there were 2, and now there are at least 18. The pink areas are areas that were deforested between 1990 and the year 2000. So that means that the first 10 years that we were doing conservation in Madagascar, we didn't do a very good job. Now, if you look at where I'm going to be talking about Rodents, and that's this protected area here, and we've been working along this corridor. And notice there's no pink, so I'm really pleased that we have not lost any territory in 20 years. Now, there was an IUCN meeting just last year in Antananarivo, which is the capital of Madagascar. And 60 of us researchers sat down and discussed what we had seen in the forest and where we had seen them. And it was a pretty grim 5 days, because we realized that so many of the lemurs were on the brink of extinction. I don't think we had really realized, we hadn't put down the numbers yet. We have about 105 species of lemurs, and about 91% of them are in the red list threatened categories. And that's the largest proportion of any group of mammals. So we're in trouble in Madagascar. The wildlife is very much in trouble, and so are the people, because it's one of the poorest countries in the world. lately, it's gotten worse. In 2009, we had a coup d'etat, and a 34-year-old disc jockey became president. Honest. Since that time, there hasn't been a very strong government at all. It's been sort of what we call the CRIS, the crisis government. It's a transition government. Basically, there's a sense of lawlessness throughout the country. And that's the time when you probably heard about the timber exploitation that's happened in Madagascar. But it hasn't just been timber. It's everything is being, people are coming into the forest and just taking whatever they want. And so there's been a tremendous increase in deforestation, and that causes, of course, erosion in the last 4 years. Illegal logging. The Chinese have come in and really taken millions and millions and millions of dollars of rosewood trees from Madagascar. You've heard about that. There's been mining. We have a lot of hunting that we never had before. And now we're really getting worried that these lemurs are going to join the others who have gone extinct. Yes, we have fossils from the last 10,000 years, and we know that when people arrived 2,000 years ago, the big animals started to go extinct. And 17 species of lemurs, some of them giant, some of them as big as chimpanzees or gorillas, are now extinct. So extinction is very, very real to Madagascar and very recent. These extinctions occurred 500 years ago. The world's largest bird to ever walk the earth went extinct less than 500 years ago. So, I mean, conservation is something that's not about to happen. It's something that we should have started a long time ago because we've lost so much already. So I've been there for 26, 27 years, working in Madagascar, and after this meeting that was so depressing with all these critically endangered species, I began to wonder, well, what exactly was I doing for all those years? When I started, I just came to look for a species that we thought was extinct, and after about a month or two of searching, and you know, I don't know whether you know this, but Madagascar was closed off to the Western world totally for about 15 years. So no Western scientists had been there. So we really didn't know what was going on with any of the wildlife in Madagascar. So when I went there in 1986 to explore, it was to explore in regions that hadn't been seen for a very long time. And on my map that I had, I was supposedly, this was supposed to be a forested area, because the map was from 1960, but half the forests that were on that map were gone. We had this, there were very few cars in Madagascar at that time, almost none, and we had to import this one from Egypt. And there I am, stuck in the mud again. It was really quite a challenge to try to get to the remote regions in Madagascar. After about almost 2 months of trying to find this lemur everywhere, I went to the places where it had been last seen, 50 years ago, and every place was like deforested. Nobody ever heard of it. So finally, when I saw this, it's a hotel, and it says Hotel Thermal, which means there were hot mineral springs, and I've been living in a tent. I hadn't taken a bath in over a month. I thought, hey, this would be great. Let's go to the hot mineral springs. So we stopped here. It also had some pretty nice forest in it. And we had a bath, and when we finished our bathing, we got up the next morning and we saw that forest, and we realized that we should explore it. So we got 2 local guides, and we went to try to explore it, but the only problem was the only forest was across on the other side of this bridge. And I'm afraid of heights. And but I just basically got on my hands and knees and crossed it and got to the other side. And this is when you come to Ranmafan, you'll see this is a very active river, very steep. And so we got on the other side, and I saw a beautiful rainforest that I hadn't seen anything like it anywhere else in Madagascar. It hadn't been destroyed in any way, and it was gorgeous. So we pitched our tents, and we started to explore. And the first thing I saw was bamboo. Now, I was looking for a greater bamboo lemur, and there it was. this hunk of bamboo that had been ripped to shreds by some animal. And so I thought, well, it didn't seem like a primate thing to do, but maybe it was a primate. And down at the foot of this, and I spared you this photo, are feces. And those feces looked like they could be primates. So we were kind of very excited about the possibility of finding this animal that we were searching for, the greater bamboo lemur. But the first animal that I saw was a shafaka. Didn't know what it was. Had never seen one in a book. Nobody had ever studied it. And those orange eyes were just really delightful. And I really wanted to find out what that animal did. And I started my study the minute I saw it. And that's now a 27-year-old study of behavior and ecology. And then I kept on going. And one early morning, we suddenly saw this animal. Now, the greater bamboo lemur that I was searching for was gray, and it had white ear tufts. This one was orange, but it was eating bamboo. So I thought, well, maybe it's just a different, color morph. And so I thought that I had rediscovered the animal that I was looking for, but I hadn't. Instead, I discovered a new species to science, which was pretty exciting. And then within another few months, I realized that the one I was looking for was also in that forest. This is the real greater bamboo lemur with the white ear tufts, with its gray color. And they were both in the same forest, so I knew they had to be different species. And then the next thing you do when you're discovering a new species is you capture them and you take blood for genetic sampling. And we weighed them and measured them, and they were different body weights, and they have different social systems. This one is extremely polygynous, and it can come in group size of 36. The other one is monogamous, has one baby a year in the group. And so they were really, really very different species. Their glands are in different places. So we described those in 1987 as different species. So just as I was getting my paper out and I was so excited about this new discovery, a problem occurred at this site. This forest, there was 300 people entered the forest with axes to chop down the big trees. Timber exploiters had gotten a concession. It was a classified forest, so they had papers, which made it even harder. There is some of the rosewood being piled up. This is Ranmafan in 1987, and I was just heartbroken because I realized that this whole forest was going to go. Because what happens first, selective logging, then they go in and start to burn it, and pretty soon it's gone, and it'll be just like the rest of Madagascar. So I went to Tananarive, the capital, and went to see the Department of Water and Forest, and I explained to them that there were all these wonderful lemurs and birds and all kinds of biodiversity in this forest, that they had to protect it and not chop it down. And the director of Water and Forest looked at me and he said, yeah, that sounds like a very good idea, which kind of surprised me. And then he said, but it costs money to make a national park. You have to do the mapping and the borders. It costs a lot of money. If you find the money, we'll be very collaborative. And I kind of walked out of that office and I realized that was probably the moment I became a conservationist, because I knew I had to find that money. If I didn't find that money, these animals would be extinct. Next, I'm an assistant professor, right? I've got my PhD in primatology. I don't know anything about making a national park. I got the money. That was $3.87 million from the USAID, from the US government. I got the money. But how do you make a national park? I didn't really know how to do that. So I think part of the success of Ranmafan is I didn't know how to do it. And so I called all the villagers together and I asked them, what do you think we should be doing? Where should we put these boundaries? What do you think we should do? You have an incredible treasure. Let's talk about it. And so our many, many conversations started. This is a small village in Madagascar. That's the national park. And every part of the border was negotiated. It took me like 3 years to get those borders straight. But I knew when they were straight, and we in the Department of Water and Forest, of course, we knew that everybody had discussed it, everybody was in agreement, and, you know, it was a real understanding amongst all of us. This is one of the villages, you know, in that first period of time where we learned how to make a national park together. And so I explained to them that one of the things that we could do is we could help them with some of their problems. And they said that their problems were health, they didn't have any clinics, education, didn't have any schools. They needed economic help with dams and things to be able to make better rice, get more yield for their rice paddies. And they needed a soccer ball. Because they explained it to me. You know, they showed me the soccer ball. They were just like, you know, vines all made into a ball. And that's what they kicked around. So I said, okay. And in 1991, Radmafan National Park was inaugurated. It's about 43,500 hectares. You have a beautiful tropical rainforest. At the inauguration were the village elders, and we had all worked together on these, on the various problems. The National Park Service, of course, and ministers. There were 8 ministers, I think, at that inauguration from the government. And that's Dr. Simons, who was my postdoc advisor for the Madagascar, my beginning in Madagascar. There it is in southeastern Madagascar. That's why those borders look so the way they do. They're not exactly straight because they were all negotiated. First thing I did was build a new bridge. Yeah, that solved a lot of problems for me anyway. And it also allowed tourism. There was no tourism at that time. And when we made the early rules about this national, there were only 2 national parks in the whole country. So we basically worked with the government to establish a national park service in addition to these areas in addition to Radmafan National Park. We were working on the park service itself. And then we got the soccer balls. We got the soccer balls to all of those villages. And other thing is the village elders really didn't want it to be prohibited for them to have zebu in the park, and zebu are cattle. And the first thing I did was I called Beth Middleton, who has worked in India on the damage that cows do inside inside parks. She came and did a survey, and she told me at the end, she said, you tell the ancestors it's okay. As long as they don't increase the number of cattle, the amount of damage that's going on here is really nothing compared to what she'd been seeing here in India. So the village elders are very happy with that. And why do they want their cattle in the park? Because in the forest, they're protected from cattle rustlers, which was a big problem then, and still is. So there they are. We ended up having 15 species of lemurs inside that park, and an amazing number of birds and chameleons and everything. And and each one does something different. I'll tell you a little bit about each of them later, but I just wanted you to know it's an amazing set of animals in one park. We started out in a tent. We moved on to a research cabin that we built because we had more and more researchers. I really believe that an ecosystem does not consist of just lemurs, that we need to know about the fish and the frogs and the plants and everything else before we can really understand what's going on. So I encouraged a lot of biologists to come, and so we didn't have enough room for all of them. And of course, capacity building, we did training. Every researcher that goes to Madagascar has at least one graduate student that they pay for when they come for everything. Then in 2003, we were getting too small, so we expanded our building to include a little tiny lab and a dining hall that seats 85. And then in 2012, by a great stroke of luck, we were able to complete a huge 5-story research station. And this is the inauguration. And again, we had the village elders came, and they did the traditional ceremony. We killed a cow to bless the place. We had ministers at the ceremony. We had Hancha is a very famous singer, and Pierre Men is a very famous photographer in Madagascar, and this is a local band that's really top-notch. It was an amazing ceremony and a whole day of festivities. This is what it looks like. That's the mayor there trying to look out at the lemurs. This is the rainforest. Right here is the rainforest, just beautiful. And so we have dormitories there, we have computer labs there, we have conference room. We have, that's our conference room where we just had a major Prasenjeet Congress. And now we have labs. We could actually bring science to the rainforest. I mean, I was so excited about that. That's been my dream for a long time, lab science. I'm not a lab scientist, but I think that using the kind of techniques that we've been able to develop lately, I think that's the way to go with tropical biology in the future. We have a molecular lab, so we can just bring the samples into the lab and do the genetics on it. And that's so important for the Malagasy, because they had no labs before that anywhere in the country. And now we don't have to ship everything back to the United States or Europe to get it analyzed. The infectious disease lab is it means a lot to the health of the local people as well as the health of the forest. And then we have a biodiversity lab that also we can keep materials and specimens. We also, there was a lot of white space, and the only way that I know to get rid of that white space and bring it back is to actually reforest a lot of the country. So we work with the villagers to reforest and the children too, and we do use endemic species with some fruit tree species so that they get an advantage for it. And that's been working fairly well. I was surprised that they could actually live in some of that devastated area, those trees from the rainforest. We do a lot of conservation education because I think that it's the next generation in these villages that's are going to value their forests and value their animals and protect them. And we've got a fairly large UNICEF grant recently. It's connecting classrooms. We're working in, I think, 52 villages and 32 schools, and we're doing a lot of conservation education as and getting the word to the people that are going to be protectors in the future. And we also, things happen like cyclones where there's incredible devastation and people lose their homes and their crops, and it's really very sad. And so we, those of us who are research scientists, and there's 100 of us research scientists that are working in Madagascar, they're from the outside, and another 100 from the inside, then we can work to raise money for the people that need it. So whenever they have a crisis, we try really hard to get them money to get them through the tough times. And that's one way to build trust. And look how they're all lined up. So it was just amazing to see 3,000 villagers, each getting bags of rice, bags of beans. That's the little bag on the top, and so they could not starve to death. And we also rebuilt their houses with roofs, etc. Economic development. I mean, this is really a poor country. I mean, it's sometimes the third poorest in the world. And we employ people. As biodiversity scientists, there's 85 people that are on our staff and also work as get fringe benefits, but we also develop small businesses in the area. The Malagasy have, I don't know, they needed some infrastructure, so we built this area in downtown, and they also needed areas to do. We started to get tourism. And that tourism is just taken off. And where in the beginning there was absolutely no tourist, now we're getting, I know this doesn't sound a lot, but it is a lot for them, 30,000 a year at this rainforest park. And remember, in the beginning, we had agreed that 50% of the proceeds from the park entrance would go back to the people. So the people are getting schools, and they're getting storage places for their rice, and they're getting water pumps and all, because it's 20 years, it's actually been 15 years of really tourism. So they're getting a direct benefit from this conservation effort. And that's really, and we give training, because I think it's not just money and things, it's training so they can do their own thing. So they get training for trades like construction and computers, and they're getting trained as to organize businesses. That's something they don't do well. So it's really worked out for this group. And of course, health is very important to all of us, and they have very poor health. So we've been working on the health and we're doing research on the health, and then we do service too. So we've been working with the Ministry of Health to increase the infrastructure and also the training. So that's been recent. This is the last year. We just got a donation of quite a few $1 million to help with this health. And that really makes me very happy, because everything is tied back into conservation. All the things, the good things that come from the park. That's good for them to know. Yeah, in tourism, as I said, we get more and more tourists. Half of them are French, and the other half are from Europe, and I think we've had 1 or 2 from India, about 5 or 6 from South Africa, a few from Australia, more from Japan, and I saw my first Chinese tourist last week. I also have study abroad, which is basically undergraduates that come from mostly the States, but some from Japan and from Europe, who participate in biodiversity research. And of course, we have Malagasy also as part of this program. And it makes close friends when people actually work side by side together. When everybody's working on conservation, it really inspires people from outside, inspires people from Madagascar too, and makes conservation a really worthwhile endeavor that's kind of fun. Children are the future. I mean, without training the next generation, of course, you're not going to be able, or training them to appreciate what they have, and training them to understand that this is a wonderful way to make income with the tourism and with the tourism spin-offs. I mean, there was one hotel, you saw that in 1986. Now there's 26, and they're building more. And they're fairly small hotels. They're not big hotels. They're owned by the local people, but they're really well managed. And so I'm very proud of that, because I was worried that we would suddenly have Hiltons and things that would be just a little bit too much for the small town and for the community. I want to warn you that there's another IMAX film. There is an IMAX film coming. I know you all know Madagascar, which, of course, is a cartoon and mostly about East African animals. But IMAX film came 2 years ago to me and asked if they could do a film about lemurs. I said, yeah, but I want it to be scientifically correct. I don't want it to be a cartoon, and I don't want it to be just glorifying what's going on in Madagascar. So they said, no, we will do it. We'll do it. So they came, and you know what it's like? Taking 32 people into a rainforest with huge cameras and cranes and trying to film lemurs. Wow, is that an experience? But it's an experience you all can share, because that film is coming out in April 2014, and it's going to be in 3D theaters everywhere in the world. It'll probably come here in the month after. So I hope you'll go see it. It's really great, and it also has my field site in it, and it also talks a lot about conservation. So I'm pretty proud of it. It's Morgan Freeman is the narrator. And he's apparently coming to the premiere, which is going to be in New York. Anyway, all of this is because we started to do research in this area. And I really believe that the best conservation starts with research. Research and researchers talking to managers, because, you know, their job is not an easy one. And also talking to policymakers. If we can all kind of get on the same page, I think we can make some progress. I believe that you shouldn't study one thing when you're in a rainforest. It's a great privilege to be in a rainforest. And so when we got to this one, we started right away to study the plants and the trees, when they fruited, when they flowered, how much they grew, etc. So we have now a database that's 27 years old on about 1,000 trees. Behavioral data, I wanted to know what all those lemurs were doing. We've even gotten PhD dissertations on chameleons and frogs and all of the biodiversity that's there. So now with 40 PhD dissertations, we really beginning to understand what's going on with those dynamics of these tropical forests. And we do get to capture the lemurs every year, and we give them medical checkup and weigh them and measure them to see how they're doing. We follow the animals 5 days a week, 360 days a year or something like that. It's all year, every week we do that until Christmas, and between Christmas and New Year's they take off. But we have local people, of course, that are doing that work. And that's why I can have such incredible papers that about these animals that we now know so much more about because we've been studying them for so long. We do a lot of monitoring assessment. Have you ever seen one of these animals? And they got to be like the weirdest animals on Earth. They're that big. They're nocturnal. They're primates. And they're this big. Bushy tail like a fox or a doe. Huge ears like a bat. Their teeth are just like beavers. They have these weird eyes that are actually not forward-facing like ours. They're kind of off to the side. And they look like really long hair. This one is caught in a camera trap down here. And that's the way we can figure out what their population density is inside the park. But they are very strange animals. I mean, I don't know how to, very strange animals. They eat dead wood, okay? So what they do is they find logs. You find them near logs. And they listen with their big ears to the log. And then they hear something, and then they tap with an incredible long finger. You can see those fingers. And then they realize, okay, it's there. And they start to dig out a hole into the log with their teeth, because they have teeth like rodents, ever-growing incisors. And they get inside, and inside a hole inside the trunk, and they put that long finger inside the hole, and they feel around, and their finger has a rotator cuff, like our arm does. It's on their little finger, so they can stab the beetle larva with their finger, and then pull it out and eat the larva down like candy. It's an amazing animal. Whoops. So it's even stranger than that. They have infants every 3 years. They live, actually sleep in a big ball of vines that they put together. It's a nest, and so they live in those. They sleep in those places, and each of them sleeps alone in a nest. But they sleep in each other's nests when somebody's not there. So they got to have some sort of community. Now, when a female comes to nesters, you have to realize that's once every 3 years. All the males are alerted to this because she calls them. She gives the nesters call. And then all of a sudden, there's like 8 males following her. And we know this because we've got a radio collar on several males and several females. And so all of a sudden, one of the males will jump on her back, and she will hang on with her hind legs. I don't know that this is appropriate, but they will mate for 2 hours upside down. Now that's amazing. I told you lemurs were special. And this guy, actually, they will, in addition to having that special mating, they also have the largest brain size of all the prosimian primates for their body weight, which is pretty amazing. We've had radio collars on them when they went 25 kilometers in one night. They can be really fast. They are, well, those are the eye. And this is the economic development, long-term research, and conservation, I think, have to go together. And we built this project with them all together. But I wanted to just give you some brief stories about research. I have a short time, and I'll tell them real fast. All right, so those lemurs, we found out that those kind of lemurs that I said might come in the beginning, you know, where the very first lemurs are like that, they actually hibernate 6 months a year, and they hibernate under the ground. And then they come up September 21st. I was just in Madagascar. They were just coming out of the ground after this long hibernation. Now, usually primates don't do that, so, you know, that's a special thing. The eye I just told you about, that's the finger. It uses this tool. It carries around with it all the time, and that's infrared camera. That means that in its finger there's no heat. Very strange. I have a NSF grant, National Science Foundation grant, that I'm just finishing up on aging in lemurs. These lemurs live to be 35 years old. And all of them don't live to be that because they have 50% infant mortality, and there is a lot of predation that goes on. And so we've been studying the aging in the wild for the last few years. And the biggest one, this one, we have animals that are 35. The smallest one, which is the mouse lemurs, we have animals that are living 12 years. And an animal that's you can hold in the palm of your hand. Now, why we received this grant probably has to do with a Nature paper that was out in the 90s that reported that mouse lemurs get Alzheimer's. Now, no other primate other than humans get Alzheimer's, plaques and tangles. But in Paris, these animals kept in captivity were getting Alzheimer's. And so my question was, do they get Alzheimer's in the wild? And we had no answer to that. We don't even know how long they lived in the wild. So we started trapping them, and now we've got 550 that are marked with microchips, and we're following them in the wild. And we're going to do the genomes of 1,000 mouse lemurs, and we're going to be looking at which ones have problems and which ones don't. So that's a major new endeavor that we just started. And some mouse lemurs in Switzerland also got diabetes, so we're looking at the possibilities of maybe there's some genetic connections with the animals. And then we've found that some lemurs have color vision and others don't. Now, I forgot to tell you the most important thing about lemurs, and that is that females are dominant. And so it's females that have the color vision, not all females, but some females. So my students are looking at which females are actually leading groups, because there's often many females in a group, and are finding out that the ones with the color vision are seeing those ripe fruits from a distance and leading the groups into the fruit trees. And that's pretty exciting. So we had no idea that would be such a handy thing, color vision. And then we don't know about this one. This is one of the nocturnal ones that eats leaves, and we're thinking that maybe it hibernates too, because there's several months where we can't see them. Now we're looking at vocalizations. We're doing a lot of communication work now, and this is my graduate student who is looking at whether they're calling more in the moonlight, what they're actually saying to each other. And then the greater bamboo lemur. Remember, that's the one I went to find? There's only 300 in the wild. You know, it's like a bustard. And so we're trying to really do some crisis conservation with these animals. And we are trying to do translocations and getting them into protected areas. We have like 3 in a protected area right now. So that's been a big challenge for us. And then we found out that the golden bamboo lemur that I discovered, it eats bamboo and only bamboo. And some of the bamboo are the shoots of the bamboo. And when we tested these shoots, because I wondered why everybody didn't eat the shoots. First we tested it for protein, and was really high. And then we tested it for other things and found out that it is full of cyanide. So this little animal, this new species to science in 1987, is actually can tolerate great amounts of cyanide. It's very interesting. We're looking at its physiology. And then the black and white ruffed lemur, it's an extraordinary animal. And it's the only one of all the lemurs that is an obligate frugivore. It can only live where there is enough fruit for them to live. All the other lemurs can supplement their diet with leaves or insects. And so my graduate student came to study the infant behavior of the black and white ruffed lemur. And the first year, there were no babies. The second year, there were no babies. None of these ruffed lemurs had babies. Fourth year, no babies. The fifth year, suddenly all the lemurs that were ruffed lemurs, females, in the forest had infants. It was like masting, as they would say in Asia, in other parts of Asia. And so that was really an amazing thing to find out. But it was even more amazing when about a month into watching these babies, suddenly a whole bunch of the mothers, well, I forgot to tell you, they have not one, not two, but 3 babies. When they had babies, they had litters. And we had 3 or 4. They couldn't carry them. So they have to carry them like a mother cat carries kittens from one nest to another nest. They built nests. They had their babies inside the nest and then would transfer the babies from nest to nest. And then suddenly one day she observed all the 3 mothers put all their babies into one nest and left the males to babysit. And so it's the first time that we've ever been able to, in all of primates, we can actually document that there's like kindergartens, that there's like daycare. And then we did the genetics, and of course all those mothers are closely related. They were grandmothers and sisters and everything. But we also had a community of 80 animals, and so we realized that the ones that didn't do this with their offspring, that weren't related to the others, their offspring didn't survive. So it's a really good strategy. So that's hot off the press. I think we just published that paper last week. So that's pretty exciting. And there's 3 of these animals, and I think it's a new species, 2 new species, maybe 1 or 2. So it's like, it never stops. Every minute there's something else going on in Madagascar. We're discovering a new species or discovering a new behavior, finding out more about the ecosystem. But remember, 91% are critically endangered. And the people, I mean, what if they disappeared? There would be no reason really for tourists to come if all of the animals are gone. And what, for even all of us here, what if all the lemurs just disappeared? They're very close to that. Now, in the midst of this terrible lemur crisis, we've been doing reforestation, we've trying for better protection of the parks, protection by the communities, and more research to be able to be directly applied to conservation, and awareness at all levels, the ministry, the regions, the villages, get everybody on board about this terrible crisis. If we can get the government to actually realize that wildlife is valuable for the country, I think we're going in the right direction. This is the Prime Minister who just came to our Congress, and we had, I think, 3 ministers there. And at our inauguration, we had, of that other building, we had, not the Prime Minister, but 3 ministers. And we include them in every ceremony that we have. Because the fate of lemurs is in our hands, all of our hands, because this is a world treasure that's going to go extinct, just like your animals are on the brink of extinction. And if INDRI held our fates in their hands, I think they would treat us very well. But we have a big responsibility, that's in INDRI, and a very big responsibility to save these animals. I think all of the world does. And so I'm proposing that we go back to those days when India and Madagascar were together. I'm proposing, after seeing this extraordinary workshop, very inspirational for me, that we all have the same problems. We really do, even though they're different animals and in different cultural situations. Doing conservation work is not easy, and we all have to work together. So I'm hoping that there'll be many workshops, that you'll come over to Madagascar, that we'll get some of the Malagasy to come over here, and that we can work together on solving conservation issues. So thank you.